Just wanted to actually talk about, Director Meek and I went to a meeting today with the Board of Health and the district, and I just was going to give a brief recount, and you can add anything that I miss. But my interpretation is the Board of Health made it clear that the school district can make their own decisions. For now, we're going to continue doing what we have been doing regarding quarantining, and going forward, we are going to have smaller group work with the Board of Health to assist in making quarantine guidance clear and keeping our students safe. So that's kind of what I took.
Yeah, I think all I'd add is that is a staff, that's a superintendent committee, advisory committee. And it sounds like there would be monthly meetings. I wasn't clear if that would still include board members in those monthly meetings. I wasn't sure what your thinking was on that.
We're going to define down. Obviously, this is our very first meeting. So I'm thankful that we had our first meeting. It included a lot of people. So we will try to narrow down, have invites that are purposeful. We want to be inclusive, but we also, I was very aware today that as you, sometimes how we can narrow down to be more purposeful. But we'd love to have you a part of it if that's something that you'd like to be. So we'll work on that invite.
I guess the other thing that was, we talked about roles and responsibilities for the various organizations, and I think there was a lot of confusion initially, but what I heard, and I think it's important for the public to hear, Jogan, am I saying that right, is responsible for helping the district with COVID response. Fusion Cell, who was on the call, they are working with the Board of Health directly. And so there's no direct connection. And just in the air of transparency, I just want to let the board know, I gave Superintendent Wise right before this meeting a document that was given to me about Fusion Cell that really is very alarming. It seems that I haven't gone through and verified what's in it, but I think if what is in it is accurate, I would have concerns about the district. You're working directly with that organization, so I'm sure he'll forward the information over.
Question, Director Williams or Director Meek. So is there clarity about the quarantine protocol, or not?
So we do have clarity of quarantine protocol as we are currently. We will be meeting Monday, I believe, with a smaller group that will be defining that even further. So as we looked at it, the role of today was to establish what needs to happen. Really helping Jogan, who is supporting us with our COVID protocols, taking that over. They've hired a few new people, really narrowing down consistency of message, consistency of practice with Douglas County Schools. The other piece would be then the Fusion Cell organization is a consulting group that's working with Board of Health. How they might be able to give any guidance or whatever as a whole to think about. Next steps will be also as we define out as a district with Jogan what any further steps will be in our processes, and we're really driving that as quickly as possible through this week and to be ready as we come back in January. We've all set the plan to be able to come back in January with more details on those next steps. But we do feel, one, we've identified and are identifying those students with medical compromised systems or ADA systems that might need support, really working through how we support them immediately with accommodation requests and decision making. And then at the same time, how we look at supporting all students and staff with any exposures and positivity. So I think on that end, we have a good system in place that we, without impacting all of our staff directly with change, that we have a good system to continue, and then we'll continue to define that ongoing, immediately and ongoing.
So our current protocol has not changed with the decrease of mask wearing. The protocol remains the same. And can you give us just a quick 2-cent worth? What is that protocol?
So working back with CDPHE and Tri-County, we had isolation and targeted quarantine. We also have regular classroom settings and high exposure. So as you start looking at that process, when you get to outbreak status, you have quarantines. So we're working to look at health and safety along with minimizing the impact of quarantines that we've seen in years past. So we're working through that same thing to look at each situation to determine exposure, if we get to outbreak status, and quarantine impact and quarantine process. That's also including the letters to let people know of exposure, monitoring symptoms and positivity and testing to look at further need for isolation within that.
So outbreak equals quarantine, otherwise there's no quarantine.
There could be specific situations that you could have quarantining, but as a whole, you look at an individual situation in a regular setting, and you have the isolation looking at the individual who is either positive and or with symptoms to stay home, work through the testing. So if you are positive, you isolate, and through that process, you have a period of time which you isolate.
Thanks.
Yeah, it'd be maybe great to get that in writing or something. I mean, I think there was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of technical issues with hearing Board of Health and kind of following along. And, you know, I felt like the conversation was all over the place as people were figuring it out. And in essence, my takeaway from the Board of Health representatives, because there was confusion that Jogan and even Fusion Health's report was telling us to do things that were more restrictive, the Board of Health said, well, you don't have to listen to them. So I feel more confused than before the meeting, honestly. And that's where I heard there will be another meeting with a smaller group of people to work out the details. I didn't hear resolution in the meeting.
Yeah, and one thing I just want to clarify with Superintendent-wise, what I heard in there is this is still continuing to evolve. You still have procedures here today. Those procedures may change based on advice that you have specifically around quarantine. But your goal, if I heard it correctly, is that by return to school for students on, which I believe is the 4th of January, prior to that, there should be clarifying communications going out to everyone that specifically remove any confusion around the matter of quarantine or how you're going to handle that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I think as you look at a relationship with health departments, asking for that written piece of who is responsible for that, so when type of roles and responsibility. When you say resolution, I think really working with a smaller, more targeted group, those would be the next steps of having that. And we have a timeline in place, so we want to make sure that we have it for our own system and to communicate it out. And that will for sure be leading into January 3rd, where we have a staff teacher workday, where we can make sure that we message consistencies with our employees and our schools, and also with our community, and then start to implement as students are back on Tuesday the 4th. So I think on those pieces, we have movement, we have progression, and we'll continue to define that with the Board of Health and Jogan in particular, who is true service provider with Douglas County Schools.
Okay, and with that, we'll
Number one is that when we write resolutions that impact the operation, I think we need to have some clear process of how we monitor that. I will say I'm a little disappointed that we didn't get feedback about how did it work when we made a decision and 4 hours later it had to be implemented, or how many students were identified needing accommodations, and how many students needed to be in environments where other students were universally masked. Or I mean, I think there's just a slew of questions that we ought to be asking if we're going to take on the role of being managers or dropping into that decision making for the operation. We need to make sure we have a clear feedback loop of how our decision impacted the system. And so I won't bore you with all the list of questions I think we should be asking when we do that, but I think that's a retreat topic. When we write resolutions impacting the operation, what's our process? The other thing I would say, I think